Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about technically the finale of Love is Blind Season 9. This is the wedding day episode, all right? We do have a reunion episode coming out in a week. Now, I still am on my honeymoon in Greece, so as a result, this video isn't going to be using a bunch of clips. I'm pretty limited with what I can download and upload at the moment, so it is just going to be me talking about this episode, and I did miss talking about the last 2 or 3 episodes, so we're going to talk about that when those couples come up, but mostly we're just going to focus on the most recent episode, and we're going to go through the 3 couples that were meant to get married. And I say meant to because, yeah, if you haven't seen this show, spoilers, but all of them didn't make it. And this was frankly, quite depressing reality TV. I assume part of the spectacle of Love is Blind is the potential that people are left at the altar, right? But this isn't a super common thing from what I understand. Now, Love is Blind purists can let me know in the comments, but I've been watching this show since the Megan Fox season, right? I remember it being a really big deal when someone was left at the altar. I think it still is a crazy thing to do. I know obviously the show is designed so this happens. The show is kind of constructed in a way so that happens. But I still think it's really crazy when it does happen. You know, if you actually think about what they're doing, it's just diabolical. And I almost have to give credit to Joe and Nick for jumping ship before it came to the wedding day. Joe, his panic, you know, that moment when he was getting dressed in his suit, he's like, this isn't right, and ran out of the room. It may have felt childish to some, but it felt like a very authentic moment of being shit. Anyway, regardless, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the most devastating one in my opinion, which was Megan and Jordan. And this was the most devastating because I was actually really rooting for them. I really liked Sparkle Megan. At first, I didn't like her. I thought she was going to be someone who constantly goes oh, none of my relationships work because men are intimidated by my money. And then in reality, it's just because she's insufferable. But as we got to know her, I actually really, really liked her. And I really liked her for Jordan, and I really liked Jordan for her. And yeah, this was really sad. Now, I will say there was a conversation that I haven't covered on this channel, which was kind of the closing conversation of the previous 3 batches, right? Where they were having this kind of disagreement, not really disagreement, just kind of emotionally loaded conversation about how he doesn't have that much energy. And he was talking about how in the pods I had more energy, I wasn't working, but this is real life. This is my day-to-day. And frankly, I was sitting there mostly on his side. I also kind of got a sense of sadness from Jordan. He's constantly talked about how he feels a bit financially insecure compared to her, and he's been very honest and transparent about that, but also just you got a sense that maybe he isn't where he wants to be in life, and Megan is kind of a reminder of that. And if anything, her insistence that we need to be doing this and this and that every night, I do think it was a tough situation, a tough spot for Jordan to be in. But more to the point is I actually thought Megan's expectations were kind of unrealistic. You know, yes, maybe they have incompatible lifestyles to an extent, but she is living in a tax bracket that most people don't. And I think Jordan expecting to be able to have a sense of normalcy and routine for 5 out of 7 days of the week is pretty normal. That's a pretty normal expectation. And even getting home from work, being quite drained, and even not wanting to talk about your day is also kind of standard. I'm not going to pretend I don't relate to the idea of getting home from work and then the last thing you want to talk about is more work. And I do wonder, look, I don't know what the response online has been to that argument, to that conversation, but, you know, it was pretty easy for me to imagine a gender swap role reversal where, you know, the woman's trying to just have a glass of wine and have a bath and relax. And if the guy was hounding her for a conversation, I think we'd be pretty thrown off. So I thought that conversation, I thought she was maybe a little out of touch. And I do think there is some give and take. I think Jordan maybe should have been look, you know, 1 day a week or maybe on the weekend we'll go a little wild. But I think the 2 things here are they're not just entering into a young, fun relationship where these are your jet setting years. He has a kid and they are getting married. And I think part of getting married is the idea that you're going to settle down, not go buck wild, go crazy, you know? So I really felt for Jordan here. And I think it felt pretty rough because when he was saying oh, it feels like I can't get tired, I kind of got where he was coming from there. But regardless, I do get Megan as well. You want someone with energy, but it's just a bit weird to be hey, you are not you're not happy enough for me right now. Get happy. And that's kind of what the conversation felt like. But I will say, I think Megan does conduct these conversations well, considering how potentially out of touch she is at times, if that makes any sense. Like, I do think she's quite self-aware. And that brings us to the chat where they break up. All right. This was brutal. I felt terrible for Jordan. I think he speaks facts, all right? He's steady on business. When he talks about the fact that, like, I regret introducing her to my son, I don't think that was said with much hate or malice. It's just kind of like an honest reflection of the situation. He's talking about the fact that, like, look, you knew all of this stuff in the pods. You probably should have kind of, like, gleaned onto that idea. But I will give Megan credit. I think she was rather empathetic and quite self-aware. There were a couple moments where I was like, that was big of her to admit. She wasn't in this sense of delusion or entitlement, the way, and we'll get to them, but with Ali and Anton, I thought there was some grossness in that. But to Megan's credit, she does seem quite self-aware of, like, look, my expectations are a bit unrealistic and maybe I really need to reconsider this. And she also talks about the fact that it's made her question whether she's ready to be a mum. I'm just going to say it, like, I think given the lifestyle she expects to lead, yeah, maybe not. And maybe realizing what she has to potentially give up, even just a normal sense of routine, was enough to shake her. But dare I say, I don't really think she's potentially ready for marriage with the lifestyle she wants to lead. And there wasn't even this ability for her to be like, okay, well, he's the provider for at least his child. He needs this routine, but, I might spend my days hanging out with the girls or, doing this, doing that, doing the other. Like it all had to fall on him. And I just thought there was some rigidity there. But again, credit to Megan. She was self-aware enough to kind of call herself on this. But yeah, this was a rough watch. I really felt for Jordan. And I do feel bad for Megan to an extent, but I don't know. I think she's fumbling the bag slightly. I do think she might be potentially fumbling the bag. I think she got a taste of the life that ideally she would probably be living eventually. And maybe she just wasn't ready for it. And I do think she could have lived her lavish lifestyle within the confines of kind of Jordan's setup with his kid. Like, I think she still could have gone out during the day. She probably could have gone out at night. I can't imagine he'd be particularly controlling, but I don't know. I feel like there was a lack of empathy for the fact that dude was just a bit tired and sad sometimes. Personally, yeah, that's Megan and Jordan. Next we have Calibria and Edmund. And okay, so I need to give an update on my thoughts on Calibria and Edmund. Now, I will say, I actually really loved both of these two individually and together at different points of this show. I've talked about that pretty in depth on this channel, but when I first met Edmund, I really loved him, and I've always loved Calibria. But I will say, that first big ugly fight they had where he kind of like broke down about like, man, I'm always punished for being the nice guy, really gave me the ick on Edmund. And then since then, I've kind of been up and down on him. At times, I do think he's a little juvenile, and I do think after we got that like mask reveal moment of him kind of guilt tripping her for not having sex with him, I've struggled to buy into his nice guy, sweetheart sort of thing. But I will say, I do think sometimes Calabria might ride him a little hard in some of their arguments. I do think to an extent you kind of need to know the type of person you're talking to and the type of person you're dealing with. And I think at times, like, I felt like Edmund in one or two conversations went out of his way to apologize for what he felt like was worth apologizing for, did his best, and it felt occasionally, just occasionally, it did feel like Calibria was leaning into a bit of a just power dynamic, power play sort of thing. Like, there were just a couple moments where it felt like Edmund had groveled, he had apologized, he had taken accountability, the best Edmund probably could. And it was just like, she just wanted this very specific type, said this certain way. And it just felt a little mum to young boy rather than a mutual partnership, I suppose. And I will say, I think Edmund does infantilize himself at times. And maybe this is something he's earned, especially after that breakdown. But in the interest of fairness, I do think occasionally Calabria, when she was annoyed at him, would really get quite stern and scold him. And I will acknowledge that I think this is probably built. We were also probably not seeing some stuff. There was a point where she called him out and said, off camera, you're a lot meaner and you get into these arguments. And then on camera, you're a ray of sunshine. So I look worse. So I will acknowledge there might be some of that going on. And I do also think she's been in some pretty awful relationships by the sounds of it before. So maybe that's coming out. But there was just a point where she took something he was doing that sounded quite innocent as really nasty and intentional from him. And you could kind of tell, at least the way I was reading it, that he was just kind of enjoying the, was it jet ski or the snowmobile? He was kind of just enjoying that. But for her, it was this calculated move to make her look bad. And there were a few conversations where it felt like she was maybe placing some intent within Edmund that I don't think he had there. But it's also like, it would be hard if you were with someone who was, yeah, really happy-go-lucky on camera and then not off camera. So I don't know. I feel I feel a couple of ways about this relationship, but I wasn't fully a fan of occasionally how she spoke to him, but I also think Edmund had some growing up to do, so whatever. But what I will say is not a fan of how she handled this breakup. She said no at the altar, and I just don't think she should have done that. And look, at the end of the day, if it's not right, it's not right, but I think she should have done it earlier. You can't tell me it was literally that moment on stage or at the podium, whatever they call it, was when she first realized. I struggle to buy that, but like, dude, like this was a rough watch. Edmund brought his like 5th grade teacher down just to get dumped. And credit to Edmund, given his crash out and how badly he handled the kind of sex chat. I was really nervous when he started crying, but he held himself together well, didn't get particularly nasty or anything, and it was a pretty authentic, raw reaction. I did feel bad for Edmund. But yeah, this was a rough moment. And at the end of the day, like, Calibria is allowed to realize a relationship's not for her. And I don't think she's necessarily wrong for this decision. I kind of prefer this over being in a relationship with someone who she seems to kind of like scold regularly and want to like kind of squish. And I don't think Edmund was ready for a relationship. I think Calibria talks about the fact that he has some healing to do and he's still very much on that journey. And I agree. I don't think Edmund is fully ready for a relationship. And I think Calibria probably is, but I think she needs to be paired with someone who doesn't push her buttons. There was this really interesting moment where Calibria and Edmund were arguing, and Calibria kept talking about, like, you've got me out of my character. Like, this is what happens. You push and push, and now I'm someone who I'm usually not. And I think it's a really interesting thing. I'm not trying to paint her with a really bad brush, but oftentimes, you've probably heard it from bloody TikTok or something, but a lot of times this whole thing of, like, mean partners or toxic partners, whatever, they'll say, this isn't something I usually do. And I don't know, I'm not saying Calibria is a bad person. I'm not saying that at all. But I did think that moment was a moment where maybe there was some self-awareness lacking. And I know in an apology later on, she actually acknowledged, like, look, like, I do get too heated. I do get too flustered. But yeah, just that moment of, like, saying that Edmund is turning her into someone, I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't know either of them enough well to make a comment on that. But I was like, it's a pretty odd thing to say. But look, I don't think they were good together. I think Calibria was way more ready for a relationship than Edmund, but I do actually think both of them had healing to do. And I don't think they would have worked as a marriage, but I think seeing him left on the altar was rough. Seeing this guy that inner child is always on the outer kind of like fall into himself, it was a rough moment. And, you know, it just got worse and worse. Like, his mum didn't come, and then he was getting on with Calibria's mum. It was just awful. But I really look, there is actually a chance that Edmund did push Calibria over the end, because now that I'm looking back on it, I remember how much I absolutely loved Calibria when we first met her. And I really liked her vibe. So look, maybe they're like oil and water. Is it oil and water don't mix? Anyways, regardless, yeah, maybe Edmund did drive her nuts, but it's kind of hard. It's like, I think it was the right decision, but it was pretty devastating to watch. Next, we have Ali and Anton, and I'm going to say it. I don't like Ali very much. I don't know if that's a hot take. Look, let's get the perspective validation out of the way. I do think Anton drinks a lot. I also wonder if it's potentially cultural or if he's just always been doing this and he's kind of used to it. Because what I will say is, compared to Joe, when Joe got drunk, Anton is nowhere near that. Like, Anton, I will acknowledge, drinks a lot, but I don't think I've ever even seen him close to sloppy throughout this show. The tequila moment was absolutely hysterical. Dude knew that tequila wasn't in the fridge. But I think the thing I find interesting about Anton is, yeah, like, he drinks a lot, and technically he is drinking in the morning, but that's his end of day after like a night shift. But dare I say, I think Ali came off a bit judgy. I don't know. Is that like a hot take or not? Like, yes, we find out that Anton used to go to the strip club and have big boys' nights and go hang out with strippers. I mean, look, is it something I'm a big fan of? No, but like, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's. I don't know. I just don't think she liked him that much. I think she thought she could do better, and I think she was looking for reasons. I think if he was, I'm just going to say it. I think if he was rich enough, I think if he was making enough money, I don't think that stuff would have bothered her. Unless he was doing it presently, right? If he was actually getting sloppy drunk all the time, or if he's actually going to the strip clubs, fair enough. But I think she was looking for issues because, and I don't know, man. I saw how she was talking with her friend, and I thought the conversation when she had with her friend on the most recent episode, the blonde friend, that was like, is that really that good money? Like, is the money that good? Like, do you really want to be with a truck driver? And she's seen there being like, if that's all he was going to be, then no. Like, I thought it was a really nasty conversation. I thought it was a really telling conversation. And truthfully, I think that's it. I thought it was a bit mean. I thought it was a bit mean. And, she was seen there talking about how, like, oh, in the pods, he was saying he was all healthy and blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, do I think maybe Anton could drink less? Yes. Okay. Like, obviously. But, I drink Diet Coke like it's, like it's water, man. And like, I don't know if someone ended a relationship with me because they're like, you said you only had two cans, but you had four. Like, I'll do it. Anyways, I do know it's different because it's alcohol. And look, if she's concerned about his liver or his health, sure. But I think it was just like a lifestyle thing. I don't know. Wasn't very impressed. And yeah, I thought that chat with the friend was really telling. Now we're going to catch up on old couples. So these are the ones that broke up in previous episodes. We've got Annie and Nick. And Nick ended it with Annie because Nick, he's probably struggling with a few other things other than just Annie. If you know, you know. But I will say it was interesting. How much Nick and Annie just completely exploded. And I kind of respect it. I will say, I think, yes, Nick obviously did something kind of shady with the previous girl and then Annie, right? Like, he did kind of two-tie them a bit. And he did lie. Like, I think he did lie. But I will say, when they were actually together, I think he was kind of objectively like a bit better. I'm sorry, I hate to say it, but like, I don't like Nick. I think he's shady and weird and definitely a bit slimy. But if I have to be honest, like, all their conversations were just me sitting there going, Annie, what are you doing? And I think the way he conducted the breakup was a bit cold, but I respected how assertive and clear it was. And he didn't play any games. And yeah, I thought Annie and Nick from the jump were both kind of not the best people. I didn't like them together, but I think Nick did handle the breakup well, and I think it was the right call. But I think Nick has a lot of growing and, dare I say, self-discovery to do. Then finally, we have Madison and Joe. This might be my hottest take. I don't hate Joe that much. Yeah, I just don't hate Joe that much. I don't think he was that bad. I don't think he was that good. And I do think it's hard. He's kind of in one of those situations. You see it in Married at First Sight a lot. You see it in a lot of things a lot where it's like anything they do isn't a good look, all right? Like, Joe doesn't find Madison particularly attractive. So it's like, if he doesn't sleep with her, people will say he didn't give her a chance. If he sleeps with her too much, then he's being really dishonest. So he's just kind of in this situation where anything he does isn't going to be the right move. If he tries too hard, it's going to look like he's using her, or it's going to look like he's leading her on. And if he doesn't try hard enough, it's going to look like he didn't try hard enough. And I think Joe isn't the most emotionally mature person. Like, he simply isn't. But I think he was sitting there and he knew from the jump that it wasn't right. But I think he was telling himself, as he says, like, oh, maybe this is normal for most marriages. Maybe you're never really sure. That's the thing. Like, so many relationships, everyone talks about this whole idea of like, oh, relationships are hard work. It's never easy. All right. Blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the thing you hear in day-to-day life, right? Everyone always talks about how shit relationships are, how shit marriages are. So I think Joe has probably been filled with that. And he's probably seen that being like, okay, like, this is going to be okay. And I think he just had that moment when he was trying on the suit of like, oh shit, like, this is not right. And I will say, like, that conversation when Joe was trying to sleep and he was a bit drunk and Madison was frankly being nuts. Like probably made him realize this isn't the one for him. But I think he was desperately trying to, one, look like a good person, and two, force something. You know, I think in his heart he knew, I'm just not this attracted to this girl. I don't feel the chemistry the way I should. I think he knew that, and I think he was just praying that something worked out. And yes, maybe he left it a little late, but I mean, after these other breakups that were on the altar, can we really be that mad at Joe? I think Joe is kind of funny. He's kind of likable. I think Madison is sweet too, but I did not like them together. I thought they brought the worst out of each other, and I'm glad they're broken up. But look, I don't know, man. I thought the final conversation, I'll give credit to Joe. He didn't just run away and leave. He actually came back and had a mature chat with her. And I think Madison, dare I say, was trying to like reel him back in. I think at one point she said like, "Oh, you're going to be okay with me being physical with someone else?" I was just like, this is earing into like toxic cycle sort of vibe. So I do really respect that Joe ended it, had a final chat with her. I think Joe has some growing up to do, like for sure. Don't get it twisted. When I say I like Joe, I understand the position he's in, but yeah, I think he has some growing up to do, and I don't even think he should have been on Love is Blind. I don't think he's ready for marriage, but I don't think Madison was right for him. And look, at the end of the day, the hard thing about Love is Blind is like, you know, they go on about like, is love truly blind? Do looks even matter? And all of them go on the show hoping that isn't the case. But like at the end of the day, if you're in a relationship and you're not that attracted to them, what are you going to do? It's not great, but he wasn't nearly as mean as that woman with Nick was. Hannah with Nick. I remember Hannah was like, oh, he said he was a football player. He doesn't look anything like a football player. I think Joe desperately tried to kind of be somewhat polite about it and also be honest. So yeah, it was a tough moment, but could have been a lot worse. And again, like at least he didn't leave her on the altar. But I don't know what would have been going through Joe's head when he was seen there talking to her mum, and her mum seen there being like, oh, is this a pattern for you, running off at the last minute? Like, you know, just don't do that to our dear Madison. Like, but yeah, Madison and what was her name? Madison and Annie, they're both people where it's like those relationships clearly weren't working. You know, the way Madison and the way Madison and the way Annie both talked to their husbands in arguments, like it was pretty bad. The arguments were really toxic and gross. And it's like, you know, they weren't being great, but also like if someone can bring you to that emotional level that early on, like this relationship, this isn't marriage material. You know, if Joe can get you that angry to the point where you're saying things like that and behaving that way, and similarly, if Nick can piss you off that much, like these aren't relationships you want to be in. You're not happy. And I think to Joe and Nick's credit, they both probably looked at the situation and went, she's not happy with me. I'm not happy with her. This relationship needs to end. But I think the hard thing with Madison and Annie was they both desperately wanted the relationship to work. I think they went on Love is Blind. They did this crazy thing. I think they wanted that love story to work rather than looking at the man that was in front of them, you know? And I don't think Joe and Nick are like literally the worst people ever, but it's like, actually look at the relationship you're in. I'm sure they're going to watch the show back and be like, yeah, it looks awful. Like, I'm sure everyone at home was watching Joe and Madison. Like, was anyone actually rooting for Joe and Madison and Nick and Annie? Because I was watching them thinking these relationships looked awful. The only ones I was rooting for were, honestly, the ones that made it to Marriage Day, plus Megan and Jordan, and they all broke up too. So yeah, just frankly, a really depressing season of Love is Blind. But thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have a lovely day. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And please consider getting a membership to this channel. I talk about every single movie and show I've watched in my own time, both new release, old release, or anything I've watched on Netflix or anything. And I will say I've been watching a lot of movies on my trip away on my little iPad. So I've got a lot of movies to talk about. But thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have a lovely day.